If you like the video, make sure to like, subscribe, and comment. For more videos like this. What was the scariest paranormal activity experience you have ever had? I worked at a nursing home where we had a resident that we had recently put on hospice. We will call him Norman. Norman was a chain smoker, and that was basically the only thing that gave him pleasure in life. It didn't matter that he had pneumonia and it was the middle of the winter. He was going to smoke. Anyways, I go into work around 8 o'clock Saturday night to check something out, and see Norman smoking in the parking lot with two people I don't recognize. I don't think anything of it since this is a daily occurrence with him. I drove right by him and he casually looked at me before turning back to shoot the shit. I finish what I came to do, go home, and have a good rest of my weekend. The following Monday, during our morning meeting, the director of nursing announces that Norman had died over the weekend. I made a comment about how sad that was and that I had just seen him smoking Saturday night and that it was strange he was gone. My administrator turns pale and says to me, "Norman died early Saturday morning." Not believing him, I checked the nursing notes, and sure enough, Norman had died around 2 o'clock Saturday morning. I was pretty freaked out the rest of the day. When I was 6 or 7, we were living in a 2-bedroom apartment. My brother, 11 or 12, sister, 5 or 6, and I all shared the smaller bedroom. Every night for several months, Mom would come in to tuck us in, kiss us goodnight, and sing to us until we fell asleep. She would sing stuff from Sesame Street like Ernie's Rubber Ducky song or Cookie Monster's Cookie song. She also sang You Are My Sunshine a lot. I asked Mom about it when I was in high school and asked her why she stopped doing that when we moved to a new house. She got really uncomfortable and said, "I have to tell you something." One morning, she said, my sister had thanked her for tucking us in the night before and could she please sing the cookie song again? Mom asked her what she was talking about and my sister, brother, and I all confirmed that the night before she had come in to sing to us. Guys, my mom had never done that. Ever. My stepdad has even confirmed this. Neither of them had any idea why we would think she was in our room after we went to bed. Especially on nights she was working. This wasn't the first or only time people had seen or heard Mom and stepdad in that apartment when they were actually elsewhere, but it's definitely the creepiest. I'd like to share this story because it gives me chills and goosebumps, and in a way it feels cool to share a story that can affect me like that. Feels important, I guess. When I was little, I absolutely hated thunderstorms. I'd be scared to death and would beg to sleep with my mom and dad. Sometimes I didn't want to wake them up, so I just tiptoed into their room and slept on the floor on my mom's side of the bed, and I felt safe knowing she was right there. My parents' room was directly across a long hallway from my room, so it was just a long straight line past a bathroom to get there. One night when I was probably about 8 or 9, there was a very bad storm and I was woken up by thunder and immediately got out of bed and decided I was going to sleep with Mom and Dad, and so I crept out of my room and tiptoed down the hallway. I probably got about 3 feet from my parents' door when I saw 3 very small apparitions in front of my parents' door, and this sounds nuts but they were lion-like creatures with sharp teeth and really cloudy eyes. They were snarling at me and guarding my parents' doorway, and I felt such intense fear that if I tried getting past them something terrible would happen. So I ran back to my room and rode out the storm in my own bed. This happened a couple times that summer. I saw the little transparent creatures outside my parents' bedroom and I never slept with them again. Eventually I got older, completely forgot about that, and I never saw them as a teenager or an adult, and if I did recall it I probably wrote it off as childhood imagination. But here's the part that gives me chills. Years later when I was in high school we had a family barbecue and all my aunts and cousins were over and the little cousins were playing hide and seek. My cousin Samantha, who was probably about 8 at the time, came running outside crying hysterically, and we all asked her what was wrong. Her response almost made me throw up. She said she was hiding in my parents' room and she got attacked by a little lion ghost. The adults all chuckled and told her to go sit down and relax, but I lost my fucking shit and went pale and had to go for a walk. I used to work at a park that was once a First Nations village and later a place where some of the first pioneers in South Florida encamped. The first county road ran through it, which later became Dixie Highway, a very popular road in South Florida. So, needless to say, lots of history and probability for a tragic event here and there. Regardless, it was a pretty quiet place with only a few visitors sporadically throughout the day. Plenty of ghost stories revolved around it, but I never considered the park haunted until this particular instance. My office was located in a small museum that had the facade of an old pioneer home, complete with Florida pine hardwood floors. Anytime someone walked into the museum, you would first hear the distinct creak of the screen swinging door opening, followed by footsteps that were impossible muffled due to the floors. On this particular day, I was in my office on the phone with my door cracked open very slightly. Someone walked into the museum and trudged around to each of the display cases that house artifacts found on site. This went on for a minute or so. I didn't really pay it any mind, figuring it was just a visitor that I would get to once I was off the phone. It wasn't until the footsteps walked straight up to my door that I opened it to see that no one was in the museum. Not a soul. By this time I was off the phone and completely confused. I got up, looked in the bathrooms. No one. Circled the entire porch. No one. Looked down both sides of the adjacent trail. No one. Parking lot. Only my car. It was then that I remembered that the park was actually closed to the public. Hurricane Wilma had just hit and the park was devastated. We were closed for cleanup and I was the only person with access that day. Freaked me out. After this, I started doing more research into the park's paranormal history and found that 2 workers several years before me complained about constantly hearing footsteps in the museum, doors closing by themselves, and faint gruff voices. They believed it was the spirit of a man who worked there for decades, even as a volunteer before the park officially opened. He refused to retire, even when he was unable to perform his job adequately due to age. He died in 2001 and the reports began literally the day after. Funny enough, the Herald once ran an article on him that was titled "The Guiding Spirit of Arch Creek Park." There are more stories and even things I experienced after that, but that was truly my introduction into that side of the park's history. When my daughter was about 9 or so, we just moved into a new house in a new town. It wasn't a creepy house or an old house. Just a new house. One Saturday morning she was invited to go to a friend's house to build a snowman and sled. Her friend's mom was going to pick her up and so all was good. I made sure she ate and had warm clothes on and whatnot and saw her off and locked the door behind her. After she left I got back into my bed to sleep more since it was 8 a.m. on Saturday morning. Around 11 a.m. I wake up. I clean on Saturdays so I turned my music on and started cleaning the bathroom like always. I'm bent over the bathtub cleaning it and I hear the front door open and close. I then see and hear my daughter's hot pink winter coat swish by as she walked past the bathroom to her room. I say, "Hey, did you have fun?" She didn't answer, but the music was loud and I didn't think much of it. She probably didn't hear me. I switch from the bathtub over to the toilet and start cleaning that. Out of the corner of my eye I see and hear her pink coat walk back by. I say, "Are you leaving again?" She answered, "Yeah mom, love you." I said I loved her too, and then the front door opened and closed. Seconds after she leaves I realize I should have her take the trash out since she was in boots and a coat. I run to the front door to catch her, unlock and open the door, and look for her. She's not there. I close the door and kind of wonder where she went so fast. I then see on the bookshelf by the door that her lanyard with her house key on it is sitting there. My blood went cold and my stomach dropped out my ass. You couldn't lock or unlock the door without a house key from the outside. It was a door with a knob and then locked only with the deadbolt. I knew that I had locked it behind her that morning when she initially left, and I knew I just unlocked it to go call after her. We had 2 house keys and her lanyard and my car key ring were right there on the bookshelf. At this point I'm freaking out. She had a tiny red flip phone I'd make her carry, and so I called her. In order to not freak her out, I asked if she had come back by the house for something. She tells me no and that they've been inside with a movie and hot chocolate for a while. She asks me why and I said, "Oh never mind. Have fun, okay?" Before I hang up she says, "Can you leave the door unlocked because I left my house key inside?" Who is that? WTF. It's fucked with me since then. I don't ever want to see a doppelgänger again. Ever. I would describe myself as a skeptic, but my family swears ghosts are real. I've had one experience in my life that was unexplainable. My father inherited some land from my grandpa after his death. There were rumors in my family that on the land there was an abandoned black settlement from the mid to late 1800s where there lived a black doctor who catered to the needs of the black community since the white doctors in the area wouldn't see black patients. So one day while riding around on ATVs deep in the woods, we found a peculiar gathering of rocks and stones that appeared to be the foundation of a house that had long since deteriorated into nothing. As we began searching the area, we found more foundations and even a large hole in the ground that we speculated used to be a well. So we returned to the ATVs and marked the location so we could return to it later. I then told my dad about the findings and he suggested I take a metal detector the next time I visit the location to search for nails or other remnants of the settlement. So a few weeks pass by and my brother and I decide to spend a day checking the location with a metal detector. While there, we unearth a plethora of metal pieces including what we think was a former iron stove. Then the metal detector starts giving off false readings. It would say there was iron 3 or 4 inches down, we would dig and then nothing would show up. We would look around more and it seemed almost as if the detector was giving off detections of a moving metal source. 1 minute it would show up in front of us, and the next it would be a foot away. After an hour of searching around, my brother and I unearthed this large piece of iron. As we do, the metal detector goes absolutely bonkers and it only gets more intense as I pull the piece of metal from the ground. Now the detector is nowhere near the unearthed metal piece and it's going absolutely crazy at this point. My brother and I get spooked, so we decide to call it a day and walk back to the ATV. The entire walk back, the metal detector is going crazy. It only ends once we reach the clearing of the woods and get back on the ATV. I haven't been back to that settlement since that happened. I'm not a serious believer but always thought the idea of the paranormal is interesting. One night I was asleep in my room when I woke up face down in bed and I felt this presence standing over me, and I remember literally saying out loud, "Nope, I'm not turning over until this feeling goes away." It did after what seemed like an hour. Now the way my room was set up, there was a short hallway, maybe 8 feet long, inside my room that led to an unfinished basement. No one had been down there in years, so I kept a few rolling racks of clothes there. After that feeling of something standing over me had left, I rolled over and peeked down that hallway and there was just this dark shadow sitting next to the rolling racks by the door. Freaked me the hell out. I told me dad the next day and he said that I wasn't the only person to see something, and that when my step cousin had stayed in my room a few months earlier, while I was away, she heard a baby crying. Never felt comfortable in that room again. I don't actually believe in anything paranormal, but I had an experience a few years ago that I've been unable to explain and it still freaks me out. It's hard to explain if you haven't seen my house, but I'll give it a go. My kids are upstairs asleep. My husband is in our room, on the other side of the house, asleep. I am in the media room, watching a movie on my TV. My husband and I are console gamers who won't play split screen, so we have 2 large, flat screen TVs mounted to the wall next to each other. They take up the whole wall. Mine is on the right. When you come into the media room, the TVs are on the wall to the left. I am sitting with my back to the door. The only door to the media room is off a narrow hallway and is the first door on the right when coming down the hall from the living room. There is a small lamp on in the living room, so there is ambient light from the hallway. My husband's TV is off and there are no lights on in the media room, which means his TV is one big black reflective surface. I'm watching my show, when I see a shadow reflected in my husband's TV that is large enough to be my 6'3" husband lean around and look in the media room door for a few seconds. When he doesn't say anything, I look around, but no one is there. I immediately get up and walk down the hall into the living room. No one is there. Go to the stairs and see that both of the children's doors are shut. I would have heard them on the stairs, anyway. Go directly across the house to find my husband sound asleep. I search the entire house. All of the doors and windows are locked and the security system shows that not a one had been opened since late that afternoon. I still don't know what it was. But I get goosebumps every time I think about it. Not much of a paranormal believer unless the unexplained happens right in front of me. I was 15 at the time and ended up going on a hunting trip with my mom and her boyfriend, of the time, to his family's hunting land. That night we decided it was nice out, so we would just sleep underneath the stars on 2 air mattresses. Around 1 a.m. we saw some shooting stars where everyone made a wish. My mom's boyfriend, we will call him Jim, wished for a white cat for some weird reason. And when it got to me, the first thing that came out of my mouth was that I hope we survive the night. I still don't know why I said that, but it just seemed right at the time. The time was now around either 2 to 3 a.m. when out from the wood line a white cat shows up out of nowhere. It even had straight red eyes like an albino. It just chilled there for a while until eventually it wandered back into the woods. 10 minutes later we hear the most demonic growl that I can't even reproduce even if I wanted to. It made all of us look at each other and immediately jump from where we were laying. Jim grabs the gun and so does my mom while I run to the car petrified. They go to the wood line where they don't notice anything while I'm in the car fixated on a single spot in the woods for some reason. Then as my eyes adjusted I could see a face where I was looking that looked me dead in the eyes, shook its head, and then walked away. To this day I still don't know what it was and can't find any wildlife that would be close to matching it besides maybe a mountain lion. But we were in lower Alabama where they aren't common and the growl was also not the same. 2 weeks later after that incident, Jim messages my mom a photo of the same white cat with red eyes showing up on his doorstep at his house over 50 miles from where the hunting land is. To this day I can't tell this story without all the hairs on my body standing up straight. I grew up on an old Native American site my family owns with tons of petroglyphs and artifacts. It's called McConkey Ranch in Utah. Seriously, check it out. Lots of paranormal activity. The whole place just buzzes with energy. As kids, my cousins and I were always pretty freaked out by lights being messed with and things mysteriously moving, but I remember one time my cousin and I were hiking around and found a small hole hidden in a crevice that led out to a shelf on the outside of a cliff that was the perfect size to crawl through, so we did it. We came out and were super stoked to find this new cool hangout area that we thought nobody knew about. There were a few fantastic petroglyphs that looked brand spanking new. We were just staring, transfixed by these pristine artworks when a huge gust of wind came out of nowhere and literally blew us to the ground. The wind gust was a typical thing, being that we were on a cliff side, but we had the most intense feeling of foreboding I've ever experienced. I'll never forget that feeling as we both wordlessly looked at each other and ran back home. I also noticed there were foot tracks leading to the hidden hole that I hadn't noticed before. I've since looked for that hole, but not very hard, because I'm not sure I'd even explore it again. Google McConkey Ranch petroglyphs for some really out of this world looking art. The scariest one I've ever had was about a year ago. This is 100% true, even though that can be hard to believe a random stranger on the internet, but I swear it was. Bearing in mind, I don't really believe in paranormal stuff. But after this, it really got me thinking. One night during the summer I was waiting on my sister coming home from work. She was bringing me home food from the place she worked and didn't finish till 1 a.m. so she didn't get home until nearly 2. She comes in, gives me my food and then goes to bed because she's tired. So I went upstairs and browsed on my computer, looking for Sims downloads. Yeah, I'm an adult who still plays The Sims from time to time, don't judge, haha. It was weird because when I'm on my computer I usually always have music playing in the background because I don't really like sitting in silence during the night. Not sure why, I've always felt perfectly safe in my house at any time of day or night. But as I was scrolling through, I heard a knock on my door and then my sister's voice say, "Can I come in?" Clear as day. I spun around so fast in my chair because my house is old so you can always hear when people come upstairs and the hallway light would have been on, but I didn't hear anyone come up and the light was turned off, which is why I turned round so fast. My sister's bedroom was downstairs and my parents were in bed sleeping. I texted her right away asking if she had came upstairs or shouted from her room or anything that would make sense of it, but she hadn't. We were both so scared and didn't know what to do. I have text messages if anyone is interested in seeing me asking her. It really freaked me out, and at the time that happened we'd had a few strange things happening in the house, but nothing as bad as that. And I also heard constant knocking and walking around coming from my attic which no one else could hear. I recorded this since no one believed me. My dad even went up to check if birds had gotten in or if we had any traces of mice or anything, and there was nothing. But as soon as I started showing people the recording of the noises in the attic it stopped all of a sudden. Was very creepy. Back in high school, I didn't drink or so drugs, so I tended to hang out with a small amount of people who also didn't partake in this activities. When you live in a pretty small rural town in the farmlands as New Jersey, there really isn't much to do if you don't get fucked up. So this leads to a lot of aimless driving and random exploring with your friends. One night, we read about this abandoned mansion called Blairsden, which was about an hour from us. Supposedly heavily haunted by the likes of nuns and evil spirits that caused the original owner of the mansion to murder his whole family. Pretty standard haunted house stuff. So we thought, what the hell, and headed there. I never really subscribed to believing in any of that type of stuff before, and was mainly along on these types of adventures because of a simple lack of a better option. So this night there were 4 of us. We arrived at the front of this overgrown trail around 11 p.m. in the absolute dead of winter. Cold frozen snow on the ground, total silence in the air. My one friend opted to stay behind and drive the car because we read that the area was heavily patrolled. So now there were 3 of us. Now, for reasons I can't explain to this day, the moment I stepped out of that car I was immediately filled with a sense of complete and total dread. Not the normal "oh let's not get caught" type of feelings, but the feeling that something very, very bad was going to happen. The feeling that something purely evil did not want us there. The other guys didn't really pick up on that vibe, but could easily sense that I was not into it. They begged me to start moving, and when I did, it felt like every single step I took there was a weight getting heavier on my shoulders. Now the path to this mansion is about a half mile long. Through the woods, with a sheer drop on one side leading to a pond and a nearly vertical hill on the other side leading into thick, heavy woods. So we're walking along, and literally every step I take the weight on me is getting heavier and heavier. The sound of our feet crunching through the snow is all I can hear, other than my own heartbeat. After what seems like forever, we turn a bend and there before us in the darkness is this huge, superimposing mansion, looming out at us on top of a pretty big hill. Leading up to the mansion is this network of ornate staircases. Probably a set of 10 stairs, then a landing, then 10 more, and so on. At this point, I'm about to collapse. I can't shake the feeling of being watched, and I can hardly breathe. I make it up one set of stairs. Then another. Then finally, about halfway up the third set, I stop. I can't go any further. I say to my one buddy behind me that that's it, that's as far as I go. If I go any further, I'm going to lose my mind. My other buddy, Josh, is about 3 steps ahead of me. Clearly seeing that I'm going through some sort of breakdown, agrees with me and says to me, while facing me, "Okay, let me just get to the top of here, and see what's up there, and we will leave." I look behind us at the trail we came in on. As I turn my head to look back at Josh, I see something large fly overhead. It was Joshua. Without exaggerating, Josh lands in the snow to the side of the steps about 25 feet away from where he was just standing literally seconds before. He comes to a stop, turns, looks at us, and says we gotta get out of here. At this point, we all take off running. The weight from my shoulders is gone, replaced by nothing but surges of adrenaline. Remember when I mentioned that the night was one of those middle of the dead winter, completely silent nights? Not anymore. We enter the woods and it sounds like the loudest, most humid summer night ever. I'm talking crickets, birds, wind in the trees, everything. So loud that I can barely hear my feet crunching the snow as I try in vain to catch up to Josh, who is a good 50 feet in front of us. After what seems like only a couple seconds, we are down off the hill and spill out onto the main road. Our other buddy, the one driving, had been making loops up and down the road and he came around the corner. We waved him down a piled in, panting, sweaty and breathless. Josh hasn't said a word. Just sitting in the back seat of his own car, eyes as wide as saucers, rubbing his hands together. We're all screaming at him for information, what happened, etc. He doesn't say anything for a long time. Finally, as we are nearing his house, he utters 3 words that I'll never forget as long as I live. I was pushed. We get back to his house and the 4 of us cram ourselves in Josh's room, where he proceeds to take his shirt off and show us 2 large, red marks on his chest. He then proceeds to tell us that all he can remember is looking down the stairs at me, saying to me that he wanted to check out the top of the landing, and when he turned back around he was completely blindsided by a large black figure who shoved him backward and sent him flying down the hill into the snow. He said he knew in an instant that he had come into contact with pure evil and that was the only warning he was going to get. The 4 of us all interpreted that night differently. I myself have vowed to never go there again, and I honestly don't even like to tell this story as it tends to bring me back that headspace and I really don't like that at all. Keep in mind I went into this story knowing full well that you wouldn't believe any of it, but rest assured that what I have told you is exactly what happened that night to the best of my recollection. I used to believe that the paranormal wasn't real until this experience. I had always wondered, and my mom claimed to have seen things, but I was pretty skeptical. I went to my grandparents' house in California after we had just turned 20. It was a sunny, warm day and everything was totally normal. We had gone to a dog park to wander around and came back for an afternoon nap. The house is 2 stories, one on the first level, and a basement that doubles as an entire second floor. The basement is where we slept. Now most people think, oh god, the basement. But this was a house we had been in since we were little to come visit, and the basement looked like a normal first floor of a house, just with no windows. There was always a light on in the room even when we were sleeping, and it genuinely just was like a normal bottom floor, not a stereotypical basement. Had a bathroom and everything. In the room we all bunkered down in, there were 3 beds, one for my parents on one side of the room with the closet door next to them, and 2 on the other side of the room for me and my sisters. Everyone laid down to take a nap, but I didn't want to, so I started reading with the lamp on. It illuminated everything in the room and it all felt super peaceful and calm to have everyone snoring a bit around me. And then, of course, it happened. There was a weird growling noise that started in the closet near my parents' bed from across the room. It was guttural and deep, with a gravely sense to it, so I am not sure it was a growl, but it is the best way to describe it. Now, the closet was always closed out of habit, but the door was now creaked open just a bit. I was a little nervous at this point, but the house is old and I am not a pansy. Maybe it's the hot water heater, wherever that thing is, and someone just accidentally put their shirt in the closet and forgot to close it? The growl kind of turns into this weird note, not like singing but a piano key sort of tone. Closest sound is like a D flat, but continuous. Now I was scared and looking at the closet. And then something shifts out of the door. It is midday on a Saturday and I am wide awake, haven't fallen asleep, etc. It's not sleep paralysis, it's not me accidentally seeing something. I hope it was my brain having a one-time hallucination, but it would be the only one I would ever have. This is real. And it's super scary because it didn't give any warning and was in a place I found to be safe and secure. A place I had felt comfortable in since I was a little girl of not even 5 years old. It looked back as night. Blacker than that. The type of black you can't even describe because it's not even a color anymore, it's just an absence of everything. It's the color I wonder if blind people see because it's literally the color of nothing. Its form looked like a person sitting in a lotus flower position, only its back was broken, so the head was hanging to the right side and the top of its head was touching its knee. It looked cartoonish almost because it was literally bent in half. The bottom half was a lotus flower position, and the top half was just the rest of that form bent to be almost upside down but still attached to the body. It made no sense. Looking at it almost hurt my brain. It was like looking at a real-life glitch. It had no eyes nor any other recognizable feature, just its form and that color that wasn't even a color. It creeped out of the closet halfway but it moved and yet didn't. Almost like your eyes are playing tricks on you. I wanted to rub my eyes to see if I was just completely nuts, but human instinct told me to not take my eyes off this thing. You know when you are scared of the closet door so you stare at it hard enough that you think it's opening and you have to do a double take? That is how it looked when it moved. Like it was, but wasn't at the same time. It was only there for a split moment with that goddamn tone ringing in my ears before it moved back and shut the door. It happened so fast I only really registered the click of the closet door shutting rather than its movements, which still to this day really creeps me out. It was like it was never there, or never supposed to be there, and somehow I saw it. And yet didn't. The entire encounter, which couldn't have lasted longer than 3 to 4 seconds tops, had me frozen in fear. I cannot describe the level of terror seeing this. I have been through a lot in my life, but nothing was as horrifying as that. I finally found my legs and ran straight upstairs and became an absolute mess. I refused to sleep downstairs and would sleep upstairs with all the lights on, though that didn't help me feel better because I saw it with the lights on. It's been around 4 years now and I still have to sleep with a nightlight, and I barricade any closet doors with what I have handy to ensure they do not open. I sleep with the door to my bedroom closed, and my phone resting close to me. It takes me a long time to go to sleep, and I can't sleep alone anymore. It really has fucked me up. I saw something my brain half couldn't comprehend. It was like staring at something so outside my field of understanding my brain just went and filled in the blanks. It was such a strange thing, but what I saw was my brain's interpretation of it, not what I actually saw. I can't accurately describe what I saw because it's like trying to describe a color you've never seen. I really don't know what it was and hope to everything in my being I never, ever see anything like it again. I grew up in a house that was built in the early 1900s in a now extremely small community, but was looking to be a bustling town in the late 1800s, until the railroad decided to go through a town 12 miles away. 12-foot ceilings, huge rooms, the hallway was 10 feet wide and 40 feet long and hardwood. We roller skated in that lol, windows above the door, and there were fireplaces in every room. We took them out for safety reasons. My room was the second room on the left side of the hall from the front door, which was never used. I used to sleep with my bed opposite of the door and the door open. When I was in the 6th grade, I had the weirdest dream. This beautiful blonde girl named Christine came to visit me. She was wearing a wedding dress that looked like something from the old days. She would sit on the edge of my bed and we would just talk about everything. This wasn't a recurring dream, as each time she came we talked about different things. It happened over the course of a couple of months, and she came 3 to 4 times a week. Then one day she arrived crying, saying he had found her and she had to leave, that she was sorry she brought him here. When I asked her who, she said her husband. He had murdered her on their wedding night, then killed himself, and she's been running from him ever since. Then she left. The next night, the dream was different. There was a guy pacing in the hall. He walked by a few times and was muttering to himself. He stopped in front of my door and turned to look at me. Remember, my bed faced the door. He had no eyes, just black holes that started to turn red as he looked at me and began screaming. I woke up terrified. Stayed awake until my dad woke up and just stayed with him until time to go to school. I didn't go in the house when I got home until he got home, then asked him to help rearrange my room. moved my bed to behind my door, and started sleeping with my door closed. To this day, I cannot sleep with my bed directly facing the door, or with the door open. I never saw Christine again. I hope he never caught her. My dad works in our state capitol building. His coworkers hear children's laughter and weird low-pitched voices in the basement, which is pretty big and, I'd say, cavernous. Myself though is odd because I'm a total skeptic. I was in high school and he asked me to help him carpet an office late at night. 10ish p.m. and there isn't a soul in the building minus us two and the security, which was, two at most. We are working away tearing the carpet out of this office when I get a pretty big thirst. Luckily we had stopped before we got there and grabbed a few Gatorades. So, this office has a door with a thin pane of windows running down the side, just a 4 to 5 in wide rectangle of a window running the length of the window to see and out into the hall. As I'm drinking I see a form pass by the window. Now the Capitol has long hallways so, you can see for quite a ways. I open the door in time to see a figure walking to an intersection down the hall. It's a man, wearing a suit, top hat like Sinatra would wear, carrying a briefcase by the hand. He turns, notices me and proceeds around the corner. My dumbass briskly follows around the corner, maybe 10 steps behind. He's gone. He wasn't running or I would have heard his footsteps. I would have clearly heard doors open and close. There was nowhere he could have gone. He just vanished. My dad, when I told him, just smiled and shrugged. He said it's an old building, with its own stories. He said now I have one of my own. Only one I've ever had, and certainly unable to explain how it could be anything other than paranormal. The story starts out unfortunately in a haunted house in Eastern State Penitentiary in Philadelphia. I know, not the most believable setting. The prison is quite large, but only a small section was being used for the attraction since other cell blocks were gated off due to the structural issues of the old building, built in 1829. The architecture of the prison looks like a wagon wheel where you had the long cell blocks go off in each direction from a central guard hub in the middle of the grounds that could look down each cell block. After I had finished the attraction, I walked to the other side of the prison yard where they have a museum set up and was standing at one of the gated off cell blocks looking down from one end towards the guard hub, which had a light you could easily see. As I was standing there, about 60 yards in front of me a shadow the height of a person slowly moved from one cell, directly across the cell block into another cell and completely blocked the light from view. All of my hair instantly stood up and I was frozen. I have no explanation for what happened. It was too tall to be an animal, and it couldn't have been a person since the cell block was completely closed and gated off, no construction workers since it was at night. I'm a pretty skeptical guy, but I don't have any logical explanation for this. In the mid to late 1980s I worked as a law librarian in NYC. At the time, the NYS Attorney General had an office in one of the Twin Towers. On the first of what would be several trips to that office to retrieve recent rulings, I was shown around the building by one of the attorneys. Showed me a view of the harbor. Showed me a view over NYC and Midtown. I stared out that window, which was on a wall with a pale yellow vinyl wallpaper, and very calmly had an internal image, a vision of sorts, of a jet plane flying straight into the tower as if I was watching a TV through the window. Like the window was a TV screen. I asked the attorney what would happen if a plane were to hit this building. The attorney went on to explain all the protective measures put in place by the architects, the capacity of the building to withstand impact, etc., and ended by saying a plane couldn't do a thing to this building. I almost said out loud, "Don't bet on it." On the walk back, I just sort of wondered how hundreds of people would get out of that building if the place was on fire, and really questioned the incredibly faulty elevator system. Terrified me. Brought all the dangers of the city into focus somehow. When I wrecked a very lucrative job offer in the WTC, I turned it down. Not that I really thought anything would happen, but when one of towers was bombed in 1998, it was almost as if one shoe dropped but not the other. Back in California, I woke up 9/11 to this crazy newscast on NRP about how one of the buildings had been struck, stumbled out to turn on the TV my mother had just bought for me, right on time to see the image of the second plane fly calmly, so calmly right into the second tower, just like my vision 15 or so years ago. My TV was placed against the pale yellow wall of my living room and it was like looking through a window. It was such a bizarre experience because I genuinely had the sensation of being in two places, and 2 points of time, at once. I can only wonder what this means about the nature of time, or predestination, predetermination, or whatever the best word would be, and how long the plans for this attack had really been going on. I'm 28 now and am a skeptic at heart, but have had a couple of experiences that make me stay open-minded. Firstly, I was a little kid, so I shit the life out of me, and to this day I have always been open-minded towards the paranormal. I was getting a drink for myself because I could reach the tap in the sink. The back door, next to the sink, had a full-length frosted glass window. This door led to the back garden and was slightly open. Anyway, there I was thinking what a badass I was because I can get a drink of juice myself now without mom or dad's help. It was a red dusky summer evening, closer to night than daytime, and I looked at the back door and proceeded to become terrified. I could see the shape of a huge black dog through the window and through the part-open gap. It was big. Think Irish wolfhound. I run screaming to my dad. He gets up and tried to calm me down but does actually listen to me. So he takes me out into the garden. Checks everywhere with me. Nothing. The back garden was enclosed by a tall wooden fence, and the only entrance would be from the kitchen or the back gate at the end of a side alleyway. All of these were too tall for a dog, even a wolfhound, to jump over. We went out the front. There was nothing. To this day I swear I still saw a huge black dog silhouette. I could have ridden the fucker into battle, it was that big. I think about it every now and then. The second was when I was much older, 24, and in my second year of university, renting an old terraced Victorian house, and I was staying in the third floor room at the top of the house. It was a creepy house with poor natural lighting, and the corridors were dark even in the day, so this may have played a part psychologically. We all found the house creepy. The whole street was connected and the loft space was not separated, so if you wanted you could easily get into other houses via the loft. Foxes would rummage through the bins at night and do their scary woman getting raped and mutilated scream. The basement had furniture of previous tenants and a chest of drawers from a long time ago. There was a newspaper dated 1930 or something like that in one of the drawers. But all of this was your typical creepy, and you knew why. One of the housemates, the one staying downstairs, always felt a presence, mainly in the whole downstairs and stairway, but also just the house in general. In the same place I felt, and didn't say cause I didn't want to be seen as a pussy. Anyway, we all felt creeped out. Especially if alone at night. I always had the strong feeling that we were not welcome in the house. Me and my now ex-girlfriend also befriended a black cat. She wasn't afraid of it, but this cat creeped me out. I got the sense that we shouldn't invite it inside, but she did anyway. After that I was scared to not let it in, and I began to feed it. It was a cute cat and I liked it, but I felt scared of it for some reason. A little cat. Now at the end of term I was alone for a month after everyone had gone home, and I was left to finish a placement. The cat stopped coming and I kind of missed it / was relieved. But I was scared in this house. I was scared to sleep. Scared to turn my light off at night. I heard nothing, saw nothing. I felt such a strong and oppressive atmosphere in the house. On the last day, before I left, never to come back, I have to lock the house up, make sure all the lights were off, all electrics off, all doors and rooms left half decent and windows shut. I felt such an irrational fear. I wanted to run away and didn't know why, but I went around the house systematically so that I didn't have to walk through the house without a light on in the room I was in. I got to the hallway, opened the door into the street and daylight. I was becoming short of breath through fear. Pure existential panic like I'd never felt before. I wanted to cry. My brain and legs were telling me to run and fuck locking up properly, but I needed to turn the hallway light off. I turned around, and even though the light was on, I could see, or sense / feel, the bottom of the stairs getting darker and spreading towards me. I turned the light off. It was dark, but it got darker and darker. I noped out of there. Slammed the door. Posted the keys through the letterbox. My hands were shaking. I walked to my car parked on a back street, and the fear started to lift. Again, this pops up in memory every now and then, and I put it down to a buildup of creepiness and my psychology over the month. But I still can't explain that feeling of terror I felt and have never felt before. Even whilst I was in hospital just over a year later, facing the very real prospect of actually dying. I was at a forest preserve in my town, a place I know well. Friend and I were walking through the woods when, above us but all at once in our ears, a shrill foreign word echoed through the woods. We walked the usual trail to the beach and then turned back. When we stepped off the beach and into the woods again, I forgot where we were. Everything was unfamiliar and dark, almost taller even. It was like my first time ever there. That foreign word returned to the canopy above us, but this time with some rustling branches. We made a mad dash for the fastest way out, which is a manicured maze of trees with 6-foot-tall canopy. At one point we got lost and turned around to confront whoever was yelling at us, and all the plants and trees blew down. On our last turn, we encountered a shadow, except that shadow was darker than the real shadows around it. An overwhelming feeling of sadness caused us to cry for no reason. On our drive home, on a road bordering the preserve, the car ahead of us stopped short. In front of the car I saw through the arm, torso and face of what looked like an Algonquin man with paint and feathers. He was crossing the road toward the woods. I can suppose his story given the history of my town and his people. I haven't gone back since. When I was in first grade, my parents bought a piece of land for dirt cheap. It was in an area in town which was known to be cursed land. A lot of people warned my mom not to buy it. Yet she couldn't resist the price. They started trying to build a wall along the perimeter by the river that ran alongside it, and every morning when they would start work again the next day, somehow the wall was torn down. No one knew why. One day my mom dragged me to the site after school, and I guess I was throwing a tantrum. One of the workers told her to shut me up because the spirits will fixate on me if I kept making a fuss. Apparently they saw a ball of light roaming around the property which was said to be a bad spirit. That night, I still remember this clearly as if it were yesterday, I started throwing up blood. A bucket. I remember holding a bucket. I felt weak and scared and confused. My parents rushed me to the ER, and all the nurses and doctors were so confused because the blood I was throwing up was not my blood type. Desperate, my mom called an albulario or curandera or witch doctor. She looked insane. I remember her well. White long hair, wrinkly skin, 100 years old. She started smudging me with what was probably sage or something. She was chanting. Then suddenly I stopped throwing up. And she started throwing up the blood. Almost like she took whatever was happening to me away and put it in her. I forgot exactly how she got rid of whatever malevolent force that was. I just remember her telling my parents that I had one foot in the spirit world and one in the human world. That's why I was so vulnerable to an attack. That memory remains with me today. I cannot shake it off. Until now that piece of land remains empty. I'm glad my parents were able to sell it.